The night on the frontier world was quiet except for the whisper of wind through the tall red grass. Ryan moved carefully through the mist, carrying his handmade bow across his back and a bundle of traps at his side. The forest stretched endlessly before him, glowing faintly under the twin moons. Every breath of air tasted like metal and rain. He had lived on this colony for years alone, hunting to survive after the last transport left for Earth. The sky had been empty since the war between humans and the outer species began, and rumors said the alien fleets had closed every route between the stars. He bent low beside a tree root and set a snare. Twisting the wire with cold fingers, hunting gave him purpose. But tonight something felt strange. The wind carried a scent that was not from this world, sharp and sweet like burning glass. He glanced around but saw only drifting fog and the outline of his traps glinting faintly in the moonlight. Ryan tightened his jacket and turned back toward camp. Then it happened. A sharp cry echoed through the fog. High and desperate, he froze, thinking it was an animal, but it sounded too human. The cry came again, trembling with fear. Ryan's pulse quickened as he ran through the trees. The sound led him to one of his snares near a fallen trunk, and what he saw made him stumble back in disbelief. A figure hung caught in his trap, small and shining with a faint blue glow. Her skin was pale silver. Her hair floated as if alive. Her eyes, wide with terror, were unlike anything human, deep pools of shifting light. She struggled weakly against the rope, whispering words he couldn't understand. Her voice cracked with fear. Ryan dropped his rifle to show he meant no harm. He approached slowly with both hands raised. His heart pounded because he realized what she was, an alien. A real one, not a story or propaganda image. She tried to pull away, thinking he would hurt her, but the snare had tightened around her ankle. He spoke softly, though she couldn't understand. "Easy now. I'm not going to hurt you." He cut the rope carefully and she collapsed into his arms, trembling like a wounded bird. Her skin felt cold as ice. She stared up at him, whispering something that sounded like "Don't eat me" before closing her eyes. Ryan stared down at her face, delicate and strange, yet heartbreakingly human. He carried her back to his camp, through fog that thickened until the forest seemed to vanish into darkness. Inside the tent, he laid her on a blanket near the fire. Her silver skin shimmered faintly in the warmth. He watched her chest rise and fall shallowly. She was alive but weak, maybe starving, maybe scared beyond sense. He poured water into a cup and lifted it to her lips. She flinched but drank slowly. Her gaze flickered toward the flickering flames, watching as though the fire itself frightened her. Ryan sat beside her and studied the strange mark glowing faintly on her wrist, a symbol that looked like a crown made of light. He realized she wasn't just any alien. She was someone important. Rain began to fall outside the tent, drumming softly against the fabric. She spoke again, voice shaking, words broken but desperate. He couldn't understand the language, but he heard the fear, the disbelief. She thought he was going to kill her. His chest ached at the sight. He tore a piece of cloth from his jacket and gently wrapped her ankle, whispering calm sounds even if she didn't know their meaning. Hours passed before she opened her eyes fully. She watched him silently as thunder rolled over the forest. The way she looked at him was cautious yet curious, like she had never seen a human this close. He tried a smile and pointed to himself. "Ryan," he said. She blinked, then whispered something soft, maybe her name. It sounded like Liara. He repeated it carefully. "Liara." She nodded weakly, eyes softening for the first time. Lightning flashed through the tent, lighting her face in silver and gold. In that moment, Ryan realized how fragile she looked, how completely lost she must feel. Outside, the forest was no longer quiet. Strange humming sounds moved through the mist, machines, not human ones. They hovered beyond sight but close enough for the ground to vibrate. Liara stiffened, clutching his sleeve. Her fear was real. He listened closely, heart pounding, and heard faint voices carried by the wind in a strange alien tongue. They were searching for her. Ryan extinguished the fire and motioned for silence. The forest turned black around them. Through the tent wall, faint red lights blinked between trees like hunting eyes. He held his breath until the sound faded into distance. When he looked back, Liara was shaking, tears glowing faintly against her silver skin. He whispered gently, "You're safe now," though he wasn't sure it was true. She looked at him again, her lips moving soundlessly. Then, with a trembling hand, she touched his chest where his heartbeat thudded beneath his shirt. Her eyes widened slightly as if feeling something she didn't expect. She whispered one word, a tone that almost sounded like wonder. Then she closed her eyes again, drifting into sleep. Rian sat beside her, listening to the storm outside, thinking about the stories humans told of aliens, ruthless conquerors, monsters without mercy. But the one sleeping beside him was no monster. She was scared, fragile, maybe as lost as he was. He stared at the glowing mark on her wrist and wondered what kind of world she came from, and what would happen if her people found her here. In the distance, a ship's thunder rolled faintly across the night sky. A patrol maybe, searching for something or someone. Rian pulled the blanket closer around her shoulders and whispered again to no one but the dark. "You're safe." But deep down he knew this was only the beginning, and that the universe had just changed for both of them forever. The morning light crept slowly through the tent, pale and golden, brushing across Liara's silver skin like sunlight on metal. Rian sat beside her, half awake, watching the rise and fall of her breath. The storm had passed, but its memory still lingered in the air, heavy with mist and the scent of rain. Birds called faintly from somewhere beyond the trees, a reminder that this world still breathed even after so much silence. Liara stirred suddenly, her eyes fluttering open. She looked around in confusion before her gaze landed on Rian. Her body tensed as if ready to flee, but the pain in her ankle forced her to stop. He lifted his hands gently to calm her, speaking softly. "It's all right. You're safe." She tilted her head, not understanding his words but catching the warmth in his voice. Slowly she relaxed, watching him with cautious eyes that still held fear beneath their glow. He gave her water again and offered a piece of bread. She hesitated, sniffed it, and then took a small bite. Her face softened in surprise, as if the simple taste of food was something she hadn't felt in a long time. Rian smiled faintly. It was strange how something so small could feel like a truce between two worlds. As the morning grew, he stepped outside to check the perimeter. Every tree seemed to whisper his name. Every shadow felt alive. He found the broken snare where he had first seen her. The rope was still stained faintly with her blood, and nearby, a strange mark burned into the soil, a pattern of circles glowing faintly blue. He crouched down, touching it. It pulsed once like a heartbeat before fading away. He looked up to the sky and saw a faint shimmer in the clouds, almost like a ship cloaking above the horizon. His heart sank. Whoever she was, they were searching for her. And if they found her with a human, there would be no mercy for either of them. When he returned to the tent, Liara was standing unsteadily near the entrance, clutching the edge of the blanket around her shoulders. Her ankle still hurt, but her posture carried a kind of quiet grace. She pointed to the distant sky, then to herself, then to him. Trying to ask something, Rian shook his head. "No one will hurt you," he said softly, though he wasn't sure he could keep that promise. She took a hesitant step closer and pointed to his chest again. "Rian," she said, the name rough on her tongue. He nodded, smiling slightly. "Yes." "Rian." Then he pointed to her and asked, "Liara?" She blinked, surprised that he remembered, and then nodded slowly. A small, fragile smile touched her lips. For a moment, the air between them felt warm despite the chill. Later that day, they walked carefully through the forest, moving toward the deeper canyons where his old mining shelter was hidden. Liara limped beside him, her eyes darting nervously at every sound. The forest was alive with movement, branches creaking, mist shifting like ghosts. Rian carried his rifle but prayed silently that he wouldn't have to use it. At one point, she stopped and pressed her hand to a tree, whispering something in her language. The bark glowed faintly where her fingers touched it. Rian watched, both awed and afraid. Her world's energy was alive in her veins. He asked quietly, "What are you?" She only looked at him with sad eyes and whispered a word that sounded like exile. They reached the edge of the canyon as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and violet. The entrance to the old mining shelter lay half buried in rock. He guided her inside, lighting a small lamp that filled the tunnel with amber light. The place smelled of dust and iron, but it was safe, or as safe as anywhere could be now. Liara walked slowly around the space, touching the walls as if trying to understand this human world. She stopped near his old photo pinned to a metal beam, a picture of him with his sister back on Earth. Smiling beside a lake, Liara pointed at the image curiously. "Family," he said softly, tapping his chest. "She's my sister." She repeated the word slowly, tasting it like something precious. Family, something in her expression, shifted then, a shadow of pain. She looked away and whispered something that sounded like lost. He realized she must have left her own family behind. maybe forever. As night came, Rian sat by the lamp while Liara slept on the blanket again. Outside, the wind howled through the canyon, carrying faint metallic hums that didn't belong to the planet. He lifted his binoculars and scanned the dark sky. His heart froze. Above the clouds, a small formation of silver lights was moving silently. Too smooth, too perfect. They were searching this region inch by inch. The ship's search beams swept across the clouds like pale knives. He turned off the lamp and crouched beside her. Whispering urgently, she woke instantly, eyes wide. Understanding without words, together, they listened to the faint thunder of engines passing overhead. Then a beam of light broke through the clouds, touching the ground not far from the canyon. Ryan pulled her against the wall, heart racing. Shadows moved in the distance, tall figures with armor that shimmered blue. They were not human. They moved like ghosts across the valley floor, scanning every ridge. One of them raised a device and a pulse of light flashed outward like a sonar wave. The ground vibrated under their feet. Liara clutched his sleeve tightly, eyes filled with terror. He could feel her trembling, he whispered. Don't move, the pulse faded. The patrol paused as if uncertain, then slowly moved on, their lights disappearing into the fog. Minutes felt like hours before Ryan finally exhaled. The silence that followed was almost unreal. Liara still held his arm, her fingers cold but steady. For a long moment they stayed like that, breathing together in the dark. The world outside felt too big, too dangerous, and yet in that tiny shelter they felt the fragile heartbeat of trust forming between them. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. Why help me? He didn't understand every word, but he caught the meaning in her eyes. He smiled faintly and said, Because someone has to. She looked at him for a long time before whispering, Human, as if the word itself was no longer something to fear. The night deepened. Stars flickered above the canyon, and the sound of distant engines faded into nothing. But both of them knew the search wasn't over. The universe had noticed their meeting, and soon it would come for them both. The sun rose pale and cold over the canyon, painting the rocks in shades of gold and ash. Ryan stood at the edge, staring into the endless mist below. The night's silence still echoed in his ears, haunted by the memory of silver-armored patrols moving through the darkness. He knew they would return stronger, faster, more relentless. Every instinct told him to run, but something inside whispered that running wouldn't save either of them now. Behind him, Liara moved quietly through the shelter, her bare feet making no sound on the dusty floor. She was learning fast how to light the lamp, how to wrap the bandage on her ankle, how to mimic small human gestures. But she also watched him constantly, as if trying to understand why he risked so much for her. When he handed her a piece of dried fruit that morning, she smiled for the first time. It wasn't full or certain, but it reached her eyes, and that was enough to make the cold air feel lighter. Outside, Rian worked on a small radio transmitter, trying to pick up signals from nearby colonies. The device crackled weakly before falling silent again. Static filled the air like a heartbeat. Liara sat beside him, her eyes fixed on the strange human machine. She touched the metal coil gently and murmured a few words in her language. The radio hissed, then cleared for a brief second. A voice spoke faintly through the static. A distress call, something about border conflict. Then it vanished. Ryan looked at her, surprised. You did that, he said. She tilted her head. Not understanding fully, he smiled and pointed at her hand. You power, she frowned. Thinking, then nodded slowly. Energy, she said, the word awkward on her tongue, but the sound of it made him grin. That evening, while the air outside shimmered with heat, Liara wandered to the canyon entrance, staring at the horizon where faint flashes lit up the sky, not lightning, something worse. Starfire, distant but drawing closer. Ryan joined her, his face grim. That's not a storm, he whispered. That's war. Liara turned toward him, her voice trembling. My people fight. She struggled for the right words. Council think. You take me. Ryan felt the chill settle in his chest. If her people truly believed that, then every human on this planet was already a target. He clenched his fists, anger and fear twisting inside him. They think I captured you, he muttered. They'll burn this place just to prove it. Liara stepped closer. Placing her hand over his, her touch was soft, glowing faintly with silver warmth. No war, she said quietly. I show truth. Her eyes shone with conviction but also sorrow. He wanted to believe her, but he'd seen what armies did to protect their lies. That night, they hid deeper in the canyon tunnels. The walls glowed faintly from veins of crystal running through the rock. Liara traced her fingers along one. Whispering something ancient, the crystal responded. Pulsing with a heartbeat of light, Rian watched in silent awe. The glow spread gently across the cavern, bathing them both in silver warmth. For a moment, the world outside felt far away. She turned to him then, speaking slowly, each word heavy with meaning. "In my world," she said, "touch human. Forbidden old law, fear of mixing blood." She looked down, ashamed. "But I broke law." Ryan studied her face, realizing what she meant. When she had healed his wound with her energy, she had done something that her people might see as a crime. He reached out and touched her hand, his voice low. "Then we'll both be outlaws." Liara's eyes widened, and a small laugh escaped her, soft like music. It was the first time she had laughed since he found her. But their peace didn't last the next morning. The ground shook with a distant boom. Ryan grabbed his rifle and climbed up the ridge. Smoke rose in the far distance, curling like black fingers into the sky. Human drones flew overhead in formation, followed by the faint shimmer of invisible ships trailing them. Both sides were closing in. When he climbed back down, Liara stood waiting, holding a small device she'd built from pieces of his broken radio. It glowed faint blue, pulsing gently. "What's that?" he asked. She looked at him solemnly. "Beacon," she said. "I send truth, stop war." His heart dropped. "No. They'll find us," she shook her head. "They already find." Before he could stop her, she pressed her palm to the beacon. A column of light erupted skyward, silent but brilliant. The canyon lit up like a second sunrise. Ryan cursed under his breath, grabbing her arm. "You just told them where we are." She looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. "Maybe they listen," she whispered. Seconds later, the air around them began to hum. The beacon pulsed faster, and then a new sound filled the air, a metallic roar from the heavens. Ryan looked up and his breath caught. A massive shadow crossed the sun, a ship descending through the clouds. Shimmering with alien symbols, it wasn't here to talk. It was here to reclaim what they thought belonged to them. He pulled Liara back into the tunnels as dust rained down from the canyon ceiling. The ground trembled under the weight of the ship landing. Voices shouted in the distance, harsh and sharp. Liara pressed against the wall, her face pale with fear. Ryan turned to her, his voice shaking. "If they take you, what happens?" She looked at him and whispered one word. "End." The light outside grew brighter, blinding white beams sweeping across the canyon. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the tunnels. Metal and stone grinding together. Ryan tightened his grip on the rifle. He had faced predators before, but this was different. This was a storm he couldn't hunt, couldn't run from. Liara reached for his hand, her voice soft and trembling. "Ryan, please, no fight." He looked into her glowing eyes and saw everything. Fear, hope, and something like faith, he whispered. "Then we'll hide." Together, they fled deeper into the caverns, the sound of pursuit growing louder behind them. Ryan's heartbeat matched the pounding of alien boots echoing through the stone. Liara's light flickered faintly as she ran beside him, guiding their way through the darkness. And far above, on the ship's command bridge, a voice declared coldly through static. "Target signal confirmed." Capture at all costs, the hunt had begun, and the galaxy itself was now watching a single human and an alien girl running against the fate written for them both. The tunnel shook like the heartbeat of a dying world. Dust fell in thin streams from the ceiling as Ryan pulled Liara through the narrow path. Her hand clutched his tightly, her skin faintly glowing in the darkness. Behind them echoed the sharp hum of alien boots and the low hiss of scanners sweeping through stone. The air trembled with the sound of machines that had never known mercy. Ryan stopped for a moment, catching his breath. He pressed his back against the wall and raised his rifle, his finger hovering near the trigger. Liara stood close beside him, her breathing fast but silent. The faint blue light that shimmered beneath her skin cast moving shadows across the rock. In that ghostly glow, she looked almost unearthly, beautiful and fragile, yet filled with something strong and defiant. "They won't stop," he whispered. She nodded slowly, her eyes steady even through the fear. "They think you take me," she said in broken words. "They kill for lie." The words stung because he knew they were true. Somewhere above, ships from both sides were preparing for war, and the smallest misunderstanding between them was all red, becoming the spark. They moved again through the darkness until the tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber. Old mining machines rusted in silence. Beams of sunlight filtered through cracks in the ceiling, turning the dust into floating gold. Liara looked around, her gaze falling on a huge broken mirror embedded in the wall, its surface cracked and half covered in vines. She touched it gently and whispered something in her language. The mirror flickered for a moment, showing strange moving symbols that shimmered like stars. Ryan watched in awe. "What is that?" She looked back at him, her voice soft. "Memory," she said, "from before war." The mirror shimmered again, this time showing an image. Two figures standing under a sky of silver light, one human, one Lyrani. Holding hands, Ryan stepped closer, his heart pounding. "You've met us before." She nodded faintly. "Long time ago, when stars still spoke." The image faded and the mirror cracked further. Collapsing into dust, Liara's eyes filled with tears. "They forget," she whispered. "They teach fear." Ryan didn't know what to say, but he felt something inside him shift. The world above wasn't just at war. It was repeating a mistake buried in its own history. The sound of footsteps returned, closer now, echoing down the tunnels. Liara turned to him urgently. "We go." Ryan nodded, leading her toward a narrow passage that twisted deeper underground. The air grew colder, metallic. The path ended at a small vent that opened into the canyon wall high above the valley. From there, they could see the alien ship resting below, surrounded by glowing figures in armor. The ground was scorched where it had landed, its engines pulsing with quiet fury. Ryan lifted his binoculars, scanning the scene. At the center stood a tall alien wearing a silver crest. Its voice sharp and commanding, he was giving orders, pointing toward the cliffs, searching for them. Liara froze when she saw him, her body trembling. "Who is that?" Ryan asked softly. She looked at him with pain in her eyes. "My betrothed," she whispered. The word sounded heavy, like something she wished she could erase. Ryan's breath caught. "He's the one who wants the war." She nodded. "He want power, not peace," her voice cracked. "He say humans must bow or die." For a moment, Ryan couldn't speak. He looked at her, realizing how impossible her life must have been, trapped between bloodlines and laws she never chose. He wanted to tell her she was free now, but the world didn't work that way. The ground shook again as explosions thundered in the distance. Ryan looked toward the horizon and saw streaks of light crossing the sky. Human interceptors entering the atmosphere. The war had found them. "We need to get out of here," he said. "We need somewhere safe." Liara turned her face toward the light, her eyes wet with tears. "No safe," she said softly. "Only choice." They climbed down from the vent, moving through shadows as the battle grew above them. Smoke filled the canyon like storm clouds. The air was thick with energy. Ryan carried her across a fallen bridge, his muscles burning but his grip steady. Every sound felt like a countdown. At last they reached a cave near the riverbed. Half hidden behind fallen stone inside, Liara collapsed against the wall, her body trembling with exhaustion. Ryan knelt beside her, tearing his sleeve to wrap around a new cut on her arm. Her silver blood glowed faintly through the cloth. She grabbed his wrist suddenly, her touch electric. Her light spread into his skin. Mending the cuts on his hands, he gasped, feeling warmth flow through his veins like sunlight. "What are you doing?" he whispered. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Bond," she said. "You save me, I save you." The glow between them faded slowly, leaving faint marks of silver along his arm. He stared at it, speechless. "What does it mean?" he asked. She closed her eyes, whispering. "Now we same." Outside, the sky screamed with thunder. Human ships met the Lyrani fleet in orbit, and the night turned to fire. Ryan and Liara stood at the edge of the cave, watching streaks of red and blue tear through the heavens. Her face was pale, illuminated by the light of destruction. "They kill for lies," she whispered again. "And truth die with them." Ryan looked at her, his voice rough but steady. "Then we tell it ourselves." She turned toward him. Confusion in her eyes, he pointed toward the wrecked ship below. "That thing has a transmitter, right?" She hesitated, then nodded. "If we can reach it, we can send your message before they destroy everything." She looked at him for a long time, seeing both courage and madness in his face. Then she smiled faintly. "Ryan, human heart," she said softly. "Too strong." He smirked despite the danger. "You're just figuring that out." They started down the canyon as the world around them burned brighter. Ships roared overhead. Soldiers shouted through the smoke. and two small figures moved through the chaos like shadows carrying something greater than survival, carrying the last fragile hope that truth might still matter. And somewhere above, on the alien flagship, the commander turned toward his officers and said coldly, "If she speaks to the humans, end the planet." The countdown to extinction had begun, and only one human and one alien heart stood in its way. The world was burning above them. The sky had become a canvas of fire and shattered light. Human warships streaked through the clouds while alien cruisers thundered overhead like dark gods of the void. Each explosion painted the mountains in brief flashes of red and blue. The air trembled with the sound of engines, and the earth itself seemed to breathe in fear. Ryan and Liara moved through the smoke, every step heavy with the weight of the world's collapse. He could feel her hand trembling in his, but her eyes, those silver glowing eyes, were steady and calm. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for everything else. The ground shook as a nearby blast split the rocks behind them, dust raining down. He pulled her close. Shielding her from the falling debris, she looked up at him, and for the first time she didn't look like a princess or an alien, just someone human enough to care. The wreck of the old Lyrani ship lay ahead in the valley, its massive hull half buried in stone, flickering with faint blue veins of power. The air around it shimmered with heat and static, like the world didn't want anyone near. Liara stopped, staring at it as if looking at a ghost. "My ship," she whispered. Her voice cracked softly. "It still breathes." Ryan tightened his grip on the rifle slung over his shoulder. Scanning the horizon, "Then let's make it speak," he said. "You said it can send a signal, right?" She nodded, "But need core." Deep inside, she looked at him, fear flickering in her eyes. Many guards. He smiled faintly, a grim kind of courage in his tone. "Then we'll just have to sneak past gods." They descended the ridge under a haze of smoke, crawling between rocks as drones floated above like dark metal eyes. The hum of alien energy pulsed through the valley, vibrating through his bones. Every sound felt dangerous, every movement a risk. Liara whispered a soft phrase, and a thin veil of silver mist rose around them. Bending the light, for a moment Ryan couldn't see his own hands. The world shimmered, and they became ghosts in the war. They reached the ship's side and slipped into a breach torn open by the crash. The air inside was cold and filled with floating dust that glowed faintly under the blue emergency lights. The walls pulsed with alien symbols that moved like liquid under glass. Liara touched one, and it responded to her presence. Opening a narrow passage deeper within, Ryan followed, his heartbeat echoing in the silence as they walked. Voices echoed faintly from deeper inside, metallic and cruel. The soldiers guarding the core were near. Ryan crouched beside a broken console, motioning for her to stay back. He peeked around the corner and saw two figures in silver armor scanning the halls, their weapons glowing with blue light. He steadied his breath, raised his rifle, and fired once. The blast hit the first soldier square in the chest, sending sparks flying. The second one turned, shouting, but Liara stepped forward. Her hand raised, her eyes flared like stars, and the soldier froze mid-step, his armor dimming. His weapon fell from his hand as he collapsed silently. Ryan stared at her, stunned. "What did you—" She shook her head, voice trembling. "I stop heart, not kill. Only sleep," he nodded slowly. Unsure whether to feel awe or fear, they moved on deeper, the path narrowing until they reached a circular chamber filled with flickering holograms. At the center was the core, a massive sphere of light humming softly. Liara approached it slowly, her expression torn between pain and duty. "This is the heart," she said softly. "It connect to all ships, all worlds." Ryan stepped closer. "Then this is where you tell them the truth." She nodded. Placing both hands on the sphere, the core brightened, flooding the chamber with white light. Her hair lifted in the energy's current, her voice echoing in tones that seemed to belong to the stars themselves. She began to speak in her language, her words carrying across dimensions. Ryan watched in silence, feeling the air shift as her message reached beyond the planet. Her image began to project across holographic networks, her voice broadcasting into both fleets above. On the human command bridge orbiting high above, a captain stared in disbelief as the alien princess appeared before them, alive, pleading for peace. On the Lyrani flagship, the warlord froze, rage twisting his features as his betrothed's voice spoke of truth and kindness, of a human who saved her instead of killing her. But before her message could complete, the ship's alarm screamed. A violent pulse surged through the floor. Throwing Ryan backward, he hit the wall hard, smoke and sparks raining from the ceiling. Liara cried out, trying to steady herself. They cut signal, she gasped. Ryan stumbled to his feet. We have to finish it. She shook her head, eyes wide with panic. They coming, through the smoke. Armored figures poured into the room, blue light flashing from their weapons. Ryan fired back, ducking behind a console, bullets ricocheting off metal. Liara shouted something in her language and flung her hand outward. A wave of silver light burst from her palm, scattering the attackers like leaves in the wind. But one shot found its mark. Grazing her shoulder, she stumbled, clutching the wound. Her silver blood glowing against her skin. Ryan caught her as she fell, his voice breaking. Stay with me, Liara. She looked up at him weakly. You, finish. He shook his head. Not without you. She smiled faintly, her hand pressing the glowing core. Together. He understood then. Without words, he placed his hand over hers, the light of the core blazing brighter until it blinded them both. Their energy merged, human and alien, fusing through blood and will. The machine responded, sending a surge of pure signal into the sky, stronger than before, across every ship in orbit. Screens flickered with their image. The world saw a human and an alien standing side by side. Holding hands before the storm, Liara's voice echoed across the stars. No more lies, no more war. Humanity did not capture me. They saved me. The message spread through the chaos like light cutting through darkness. But even as peace reached the skies, the core began to overload. The walls shook, alarms screamed. Ryan grabbed Liara and pulled her close. We did it, he whispered. She smiled through the pain. Then let it mean something. The explosion tore through the chamber. A wave of light rising into the heavens. From orbit it looked like a star being born. A burst of brilliance that silenced every gun and blinded every sensor. And for the first time since the war began, the universe went quiet. The light faded slowly, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the sound of war. Ryan opened his eyes to see smoke drifting through the air like ghosts of fire. The ship's core chamber was half destroyed. Walls scorched and trembling under distant thunder. He coughed, tasting metal and dust. The air smelled of ozone and burned stone. Somewhere near him, Liara lay motionless, her silver hair tangled against the cracked floor. He crawled to her side, his hands shaking. Liara, he whispered, but she didn't move. Her skin flickered faintly with traces of light, like embers refusing to die. He pressed his hand over her heart, waiting, praying. Then he felt it, faint but real, a rhythm, slow and fragile. He exhaled in relief, his voice breaking. You're alive outside the wreck. The world had gone quiet. The fleets in orbit had stopped firing, their weapons silenced by what they'd seen. Across both command ships, humans and aliens watched the same message play in stunned silence. The image of Liara and Ryan standing side by side before the explosion, her voice echoing across their channels, calling for peace for a moment. War itself seemed to lose its meaning. Ryan helped her sit up slowly. She blinked weakly, her eyes dimmer than before. It worked, she whispered. Her voice was barely more than a breath. He nodded. They heard you, she tried to smile, but pain crossed her face instead. Her wound still glowed faintly, pulsing with light that looked wrong, too deep, too bright. The core burned me, she said quietly. Energy too strong. He shook his head. You'll be fine. I'll get you help. She looked at him with a sad calm that told him she didn't believe that. They stumbled out of the wreck into the valley. The sky above was torn open by streaks of light from broken ships, but the gunfire was gone. Only silence and drifting smoke remained. The world looked like it had survived the end of time. Liara leaned against him, her steps slow and uneven. Her body felt cold despite the heat still rising from the ground. They reached the edge of the river where the canyon met the plains. The water was black with ash but still moved with life. Ryan helped her sit near the bank. Kneeling beside her, she looked up at the horizon, where the twin suns were beginning to rise again. Their reflection shimmered in her eyes. Your world, she said softly, so loud, yet so kind, he smiled faintly. And yours? She looked down, her expression heavy. Mine forgot how to feel. Far in the distance, faint silhouettes appeared in the sky, dropships descending through the haze. Human and Lirani both, approaching the crash site carefully. For the first time, they weren't coming to kill. They were coming to see. Liara reached for Ryan's hand, her fingers trembling. When they come, she said, tell them truth. Even if they not listen. He nodded, his throat tight. "I'll tell them everything." She looked at him then, truly looked as if memorizing his face. "You changed my heart," she whispered. "And maybe the stars." He tried to hold her close, to give her warmth, but her light was fading. The glow that once pulsed beneath her skin dimmed with every breath. He felt panic rising inside him. "Stay with me, please," she smiled weakly. "I stay, just not in same way." Her voice drifted softer. "Part of me live in you now." He didn't understand until he felt it. The faint shimmer under his skin, the silver veins along his arm glowing softly where she had once touched him. Her light had left a trace inside him. Her essence had merged with his, binding their lives in ways neither of them could explain. As her breathing slowed, she turned her gaze to the rising suns and whispered something in her language. The words carried on the wind, melodic and haunting. Ryan held her until the glow faded completely, until the silence became absolute. He sat there for a long time, the world spinning quietly around them. By the time the search ships arrived, they found him sitting beside her body, his face streaked with ash and tears. He didn't speak when they asked what happened. He just lifted her hand gently and whispered, "She saved us later." When the humans and Lirani met on neutral ground for the first time in decades, the recordings of her message were played again, across the halls of ships and councils. Her voice echoed, the alien princess who spoke for peace and the human who stood beside her. Her last words became law, her image became symbol, and Rian, the hunter who once lived alone on a forgotten world, became the first envoy between their races, carrying both her memory and her light inside him. At night, when he looked up at the stars, he could still feel her presence, faint but certain, like a heartbeat woven into the fabric of the universe. The galaxies that once burned with hatred now shimmered with the fragile possibility of peace. And in the quiet between worlds, somewhere beyond the reach of war, her voice whispered through the stars, soft and eternal, "You're not alone anymore." The sky over the valley glowed like a wound trying to heal, the colors of dawn bleeding into the smoke of a dying war. Ryan stood alone by the river where the last traces of Liara's light had faded, his hand still stained faintly silver from where she had touched him. The world was quiet now, too quiet, and he could almost hear her voice in the wind whispering words he could no longer understand, but would never forget. Behind him, the first human and Lirani ships landed side by side, their engines sighing into silence. Soldiers stepped out, tired, cautious, unsure if the peace would hold. They looked around at the ruins, the wrecked ship, the valley still glowing faintly from the explosion that had changed everything. No one fired, no one shouted. They simply watched the man who had survived it all, the man carrying a light that no one could explain. Ryan felt their eyes on him but said nothing. He was too tired for politics or history. All he wanted was one more moment with the echo of her voice. He knelt where she had lain, the earth still warm, the air still humming softly as if part of her still lived there. When he pressed his palm to the ground, a faint shimmer pulsed under his hand, like the heartbeat of something vast and unseen. A human officer approached carefully, his armor scorched from battle. "Is she here?" he asked softly. Ryan didn't look up. "She's gone," he said, his voice raw. "But not really." The officer didn't understand, not yet, but he didn't press further. From the Lirani ship, a tall figure emerged, its silver armor reflecting the broken sunrise. He removed his helmet slowly, revealing sharp features and eyes that once belonged to her people's pride. "I am High Commander Ilir," he said quietly, his voice heavy with shame. "We saw her message." Rian looked at him with silent anger. "You saw it too late." The commander lowered his gaze. "We believed lies for too long," he said, "and it cost us everything." Ryan turned to face him fully, the faint light still glowing along his veins. "It cost her," he said, "and she didn't even hate you." Ilir's eyes flickered with grief. "She was the heart of our people," he said softly. "Now she is the bridge between us." The soldiers on both sides began to gather near the wreck, watching as the two men stood across from each other. One human, one alien, both carrying the weight of worlds. There was no hatred in their faces anymore, only exhaustion and something that looked like respect. For the first time, silence felt like peace instead of fear. Rian looked to the horizon where the sun finally broke through the last veil of smoke. Its light hit the wrecked ship, scattering reflections across the river until it shimmered with silver fire. Liara's mark, the same symbol that had glowed on her wrist, began to appear faintly in the reflection. Not solid, not spirit, but something eternal. The soldiers murmured softly, some falling to their knees without knowing why. The commander stepped forward. "We will honor her," he said. "The council will end the war. Her message will be law." Ryan nodded slowly. "Make sure it stays that way." He walked toward the river, his boots sinking into wet ash. He stared at the reflection until it blurred with the tears he could no longer hold back. As night came again, the stars returned. But they looked different now, brighter, closer, almost alive. The humans began to rebuild the outpost, and the Lirani sent healers instead of soldiers. Machines hummed softly, gathering debris, cleaning the battlefield. Ryan stayed apart from them. Living in a small tent by the river, he spoke little. But at night he would sit beneath the open sky and whisper her name. One evening, as he sat watching the stars, the air shimmered faintly beside him. A faint silver light coiled through the mist, forming shapes too fragile to be real. For a heartbeat he thought it was a dream, but then he heard it, her voice soft and distant. "Ryan." He froze, the sound of her name on his lips. "Liara." The light pulsed gently, almost like a smile. "The stars listen now," she said. "Keep them kind." Then the glow faded into the night, leaving him trembling but smiling through the tears. Years passed and stories grew. The tale of the human hunter and the alien princess spread across colonies and worlds. Children on distant planets whispered her name as a legend, and leaders spoke of her as the one who ended the endless war. Monuments rose in her image, one hand reaching toward the stars, the other toward Earth at her feet, carved into the stone. Were her last words, "No more lies, no more war"? Ryan never returned to Earth. He chose to remain where it all began, guarding the valley where her light once shone. Sometimes, late at night, he would feel that faint pulse under his skin again, the bond she left behind. It reminded him that somewhere across the endless dark, part of her still lived, watching, guiding, whispering to the stars. And as the wind passed through the canyon, carrying the faint hum of her old ship now buried beneath the soil, it sounded almost like her voice, soft and eternal, telling him that the universe had changed, not through armies or power, but through something smaller, something fragile and unstoppable, a moment of mercy, a single act of trust, and the bond between two souls who refused to be enemies. That was how peace began. That was how legends are born. That was how the stars remembered them both forever.